Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey through damp forests and stone halls, across fields brushed by time, into the soft footfalls of a Frankish king whose reign would reshape Europe. You've likely heard his name whispered through the corridors of history, Charlemagne, Charles the Great. But tonight, you won't simply learn about him, you'll walk beside him, not as a soldier, not as a courtier, but as a quiet observer, drifting gently through each moment, each parchment, each fireside decision that defined the arc of his life and legacy. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. You're welcome to share your location and time zone too. We have listeners from every corner of the map, and it's always lovely to see where you're resting your head. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken beneath a pale canopy of pine, dew clinging to your sleeves, and the distant sound of horses snorting in the early light. It is the year 768, and you are standing near the encampment of a Frankish king, not yet great, not yet crowned Holy Roman Emperor. Just Charles, the son of Pepin the Short. The air is thick with the scent of wet leaves, iron, and the morning bread already baking beside glowing coals. His father has just passed. Pepin's once mighty shadow now lifts, and the realm has been divided between Charles and his younger brother Charlemagne, an arrangement that already raises murmurs among nobles and priests alike. You hear it in the low whispers around the campfires, two kings in one kingdom, not for long. Charles is tall for his age, broad-shouldered, with steady eyes that scan both map and man with equal sharpness. He's only in his 20s, yet already commands with the air of someone older, as though born into the saddle of destiny. You wander through tents hung with woolen banners, past men sharpening swords not out of bloodlust, but out of habit. This is a kingdom always on the brink of marching. The Franks are a restless people, and Charles, so, they say, has inherited not just his father's crown, but his grandfather's fire. You remember Charles Martel, don't you? The hammer who turned back the Muslim advance at Tours. That blood still pulses in Charlemagne's veins. But tonight, there is no clamour of war. There's a strange stillness. Charles is preparing not to fight yet, but to govern. You find yourself in a candlelit chamber where scribes are copying law codes on thick parchment. The Frankish realm is sprawling, and fractured nobles hold their own courts, local rulers their own customs. What Charles needs is cohesion. What he dreams of is unity. He walks through the court in plain woolen robes, no crown yet, no sceptre. He isn't crowned King of the Franks with trumpet fanfare in some marble hall. No, his coronation is modest, held in Noyon, in a simple church. The ceremony itself is sparsely recorded. No grand procession, no detailed account of sacred vows. Historians still question whether the event was even considered significant at the time. It is only in hindsight that the weight of this moment presses down like fog on a morning field. Yet something is already shifting. You feel it in the way Charles speaks not just to nobles, but to clerics, to peasants, even to the occasional wandering merchant. He is curious, hungry for knowledge, not just power. You catch him listening, actually listening, as an old monk describes the stars, and a Roman text is translated aloud by candlelight. A lesser-known tale, one of those charming quirks that slips past the grand histories. is that Charles, even early on, tried to learn to write. Not read he could do that, but to write with his own hand. He practised often, even kept a wax tablet beneath his pillow, they say. Yet despite all effort, he never quite mastered it. His fingers, accustomed to sword and rein, refused the delicate curls of script, and so, even the great Charlemagne, the man who would soon be called Pater Europae, father of Europe, struggled with his pen like a schoolboy, a gentle reminder, perhaps, that greatness does not require perfection, just persistence. Now, as stars rise above the forest canopy, and the flicker of hearths glows in the fields beyond, Charles prepares not just for rule, but for legacy. His brother Charlemagne still lives, and uneasy truces stretch between them. But something in you knows only one flame will burn long in this land. And tonight, as the mist settles along the river Oise, and the hooves grow quiet, you rest under the banner of a king not yet legendary but already luminous. You awaken to the sound of bells deep, deliberate, echoing across a modest settlement that clings to the edge of the Rhine. The bells toll not for mourning, nor for battle, but for building. You're in Aachen, or as some call it now, Aquis Granum, a place of steaming springs, wooded hills, and Roman whispers still lingering in the stones. It's the early 770s, and Charles has begun to mould his realm, not just through swords and treaties, but through architecture, order, and something stranger for a king of war learning. You find yourself wandering through the early foundations of what will one day become Charlemagne's favourite city, the heart of his realm, and the seat of something larger than a court, something closer to a rebirth. The royal residence is still humble for now wood and wattle, with scaffolding leaning like old men into the breeze, but the vision is grand. Charles is building not just a palace but a future, and that future, it seems, involves books. You hear voices soft and Latin-tinged emerging from a small hall nearby. Inside, a monk named Alcuin of York has just arrived, invited from faraway Anglo-Saxon lands. Alcuin is a scholar, a teacher, and, some say, a quiet revolutionary. His eyes gleam with a calm mischief as he presents the king with scrolls and scripts, quoting old Roman wisdom and laying the foundations of what will come to be known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Charles listens closely, nodding slowly. Though he cannot write himself, he speaks fluently in Latin and Frankish, understands Greek, and absorbs ideas like dry soil soaks up spring rain. He speaks with Alcuin not as distant monarch, but as a peer. Together, they sketch something bold schools for boys, not just nobles, but even children of merchants and peasants, a standard Latin script, legible and clear, an empire of the mind, not just the sword. You pass through the halls where scribes now work day and night. The flicker of oil lamps casts golden halos on the faces of young students hunched over tablets, forming each letter with exaggerated care. The rooms are cold, but the minds within are warm with curiosity. One curious custom stands out. Charles insists that even his daughters receive an education, though he never allows them to marry, preferring to keep them close at court. Historians still wonder why. Was it protection control, or a quiet resistance to the usual demands of royal matchmaking? We may never know. Outside, the scent of iron mingles with pine. Blacksmiths are repairing spears, yes, but also tools, ploughs, hinges, gears. Even in war, Charles is thinking about peace, about order, about permanence. You spot a young man carving a strange image into stone, a Roman arch, but with a Frankish twist. This is the architecture of fusion. Roman law meets Germanic tradition. Latin script meets northern tongue. Not everything runs smoothly. You overhear arguments between bishops about liturgical wording. Should the creed include the filioque or not? Should Mass follow the Roman rite or a local variant? These may seem like whispers in a chapel, but they echo across kingdoms. Even Charles sometimes loses patience. But rather than force a solution, he convenes councils, listens, and allows ideas to simmer. A lesser-known fact floats into your ear from a passing clerk. The earlier surviving version of the Carolingian court rules mentions who must pour the king's bathwater. Even cleanliness, it seems, was a structured affair in Charles's palace. And so, days pass in quiet construction. Charlemagne begins to form his legacy not just in gold or blood, but in pages, stone, and ink. He speaks often of the Respublica Christiana, a Christian commonwealth, where rulers serve God by educating people, feeding the poor, and maintaining justice. It is idealistic, yes, but it is sincere. You walk with him one evening beneath a canopy of stars. He pauses to admire the steam rising from Aachen's natural hot springs. The Romans were wise, he murmurs to Alcuin, but they forgot their soul. The monk nods but says nothing. A silence passes between them, half agreement, half question. The debate still lingers centuries later. Was Charlemagne building a Roman revival, a Germanic kingdom with Roman frosting, or something entirely new? Scholars can't quite agree. But here, in the quiet warmth of a spring-fed bathhouse, with candlelit corridors curling through halls of wood and promise, the question feels less urgent. What matters more is the rhythm of it all, the slow, patient layering of learning atop power, of silence atop strategy. You drift past a library now, a simple room, but growing by the week. New manuscripts arrive from monasteries across Francia, Italy, and beyond. Some are copied from Roman originals. Others are entirely fresh hymns, court records, theological musings. You stop before a young scribe. His fingers are ink-stained, his lips moving silently as he copies a psalm. He looks up at you, drowsy-eyed, and smiles. Then he dips his quill again. Outside, the bell tolls once more. The air smells faintly of beeswax and damp parchment. Night gathers around Aachen, and within its rising halls, a king dreams not of conquests, but of classrooms. You awaken with the sun slanting low through Lombard arches, casting golden light on a courtyard still damp from morning rain. You're no longer in Aachen. Now, your feet rest upon the cobbled roads of northern Italy. The year is 773 and Charlemagne, no longer just king of the Franks, now eyes the iron crown of the Lombards. The air here carries a different rhythm, slower, silkier, echoing with the songs of monks and the clicking of merchant carts. The kingdom of the Lombards has stood proudly in Italy for over 2 centuries, ruled now by King Desiderius, who sits in Pavia with wary eyes turned northward, and rightly so. You find yourself in a campaign camp quiet, orderly, purposeful. Charlemagne has crossed the Alps with a purpose, and unlike most kings, he's doing more than swinging swords. You notice the way he listens to advisors, speaks to Roman churchmen, and carefully considers not just conquest, but succession. Desiderius had once tried to marry his daughter into Charlemagne's family. That arrangement ended badly, and now the hills hum with the sound of retribution. By spring of 774, Pavia has fallen. No fanfare, no ruinous siege. Charlemagne walks through the gates not like a conqueror, but like a judge stepping into a long-neglected courtroom. Desiderius is sent quietly into exile at a monastery, perhaps even allowed to keep a few comforts, a few books, maybe even a quiet corner for prayer. And now, the strange part. Charles takes the Iron Crown of Lombardy, but instead of smashing the kingdom, he preserves much of its structure. He becomes king of the Lombards himself, a Frankish king, now ruling over Italians. You wander with him as he studies local laws, meets with bishops, and listens to complaints in both Latin and the softer, local dialects. It's a fusion. He doesn't erase, he absorbs. There's something oddly warm in how he handles the city of Rome during this time. The Pope, Adrian IV, welcomes him as a defender of the faith. Charlemagne, in turn, confirms the donation of Pepin, the old promise of land and protection to the papacy. But behind those solemn oaths, you sense a practical rhythm, Frankish soldiers securing routes, Latin clerks rewriting agreements, and Italian craftsmen slowly shifting their loyalties. You catch a human moment in a small chapel in Milan, where Charles lingers longer than expected. A monk is singing, barely audible, his voice aged and trembling. Charles closes his eyes, not praying exactly, just listening. Later that night, he remarks that the hymn reminded him of his mother's voice, long ago on a stormy night. Few records mention that detail. Most speak only of cities taken, titles claimed. But that quiet chapel song, it lingers in the corners of your memory, like a whispered lullaby. You begin to notice how Charles travels differently now. His court has grown more scribes, more horses, more questions, and yet he still insists on simple clothing, plain meals, and quick decisions. He rides faster than expected, eats less than his knights, and demands more thought than obedience. There's a minor debate among historians about whether Charlemagne's Italian conquest was driven by faith, family revenge, or simple strategy. The truth, as it often is, might be a blend of all three. His wife at the time, Desiderata, daughter of Desiderius, was sent back home in a hasty annulment that left some chroniclers puzzled. Was it politics, personality? We may never fully know. And now, with Italy under his belt, you wander through Charlemagne's encampment in the Po Valley, where Roman ruins peek from beneath Lombard houses. A child runs past carrying a piece of old mosaic blue and gold glass, chipped but beautiful. You watch as the child hands it to a scribe, who smiles, pockets it, and whispers. The old world always finds a way back. That line stays with you as you walk the halls of a new court in Pavia. Charlemagne is sitting beside bishops and nobles, Frankish and Lombard alike, reading aloud a list of new rules, not edicts, not punishments, guidelines. You can almost hear Alcuin's influence. There's a warmth in this strange marriage of kingdoms. You pass a wedding feast where a Frankish knight marries a Lombard noblewoman, their guests laughing in mismatched languages, clinking cups of a honeyed wine beneath garlands of fresh rosemary. No painting survives, but if one did, you imagine it'd be small, golden-edged, and very fond. And still, Charles keeps moving. He's not the kind of ruler who lingers. The conquest of Lombardy is complete, but now comes the true task making it last. And so, you travel back north with him, the weight of 2 crowns resting not on his brow, but in his eyes, always scanning horizons. As night falls over the plains of northern Italy, with smoke curling from hearths and monks whispering prayers into darkened naves. You lie quietly beside a stream. A frog croaks once. Somewhere nearby, a soldier hums the tune of that Milanese monk's hymn. The kingdom has changed. The king has grown. And you, gentle witness to history, close your eyes beneath the stars of two worlds newly joined. You awaken in the hush of a palace corridor, tapestries gently swaying in the breeze, the smell of beeswax candles lingering in the morning air. You are in the heart of Charlemagne's court, where the clatter of swords has been replaced, at least for now, with the subtler, sharper music of politics. And here you begin to notice something. The rhythm of power is not only a matter of kings and warriors. It flows just as softly through the fingers of queens, sisters and daughters. Gisela, Charlemagne's sister, walks the hall with a calm that draws glances but never resistance. She is no mere ornament. Raised in the royal court and educated in the church, she carries a mind that has matched bishops in debate and guided abbots in reform. You find her in a cloister garden, dictating letters to abbesses across the realm, shaping the Christian mission from behind monastery walls. Though rarely listed among the empire's decision-makers, Gisela is one of those steady voices that shapes policy quietly, like a river beneath stone. Some records say she governed her convent at Chelles with near-regal authority. Others hint that she advised Charles more often than most of his formal counsellors. And then there are the wives. You move softly through the private quarters, where the story grows, tangled. Charlemagne's marital life is a maze of alliances, annulments, and affectionate contradictions. His first marriage to Himiltrude may never have been formal, or perhaps it was. Records are fuzzy. Then came Desiderata, daughter of Desiderius, the Lombard king. That union lasted scarcely a year before being dismissed, perhaps for politics, perhaps something else. But it's Hildegard who draws your eye now. Just 16 when she wed Charlemagne. She bore him 9 children and travelled with him through campaigns, courts, and councils. Her influence ran deeper than was spoken aloud. Some accounts suggest she advised on land grants. Others describe her as fiercely devoted to education, often seen with scrolls in her lap while feeding one child and minding another. You see her now in a palace courtyard, gently correcting her daughter's Latin while braiding her hair. The emperor arrives and pauses just long enough to smile before turning to speak with a clerk about a boundary dispute in Saxony. The balance is delicate but real. They rule together, if not in title, then in tone. A curious, lesser-known detail emerges from a scribbled note in the palace archive. Hildegard insisted that her daughters learn not only Latin, but also basic Greek and arithmetic. Charlemagne, though often cautious with court marriages, encouraged their studies and preserved their place in court life. His daughters, Rotrud, Bertha, Gisela, became known not just for their beauty but their intelligence, their music, and their voices in theological discussion. And still, he never allowed them to marry. It is one of the great puzzles of Charlemagne's reign. Despite frequent offers from noble houses across Europe, the emperor kept his daughters unmarried and close. Some historians suggest a protective paternal instinct, fearing the power husbands might gain. Others speculate that the women themselves preferred the freedom of court life over arranged matches. You sit by a fire where 2 elderly court women chat over embroidery. One leans in and says with a smile, he trusted them more than his generals. That's why he kept them. The other nods but adds, "Still, it wasn't easy for them. Too visible to be ignored, too bound to ever leave. Such is the fate of royal women in this time central but silent, beloved but bound." You pass a side room where music floats through the evening air. It's Bertha playing the harp. She's joined by Eginhard, a young scholar in her father's court. The two laugh softly, cautiously. Later, Eginhard will write of Charlemagne's greatness, but here he is simply a man in the glow of candlelight, enchanted by the daughter of a king. One charming tale survives from this very room. According to legend, perhaps embroidered by later storytellers, Eginhard once stayed so late with Bertha that he was trapped by fresh snow. To avoid detection, she carried him across the courtyard on her back, leaving only one set of footprints behind. The tale is sweet, maybe apocryphal, but the affection in it is hard to deny. As dusk falls, you walk the dim passages where politics swirl behind every door. The court is a place of alliances, yes, but also of affection, of loyalty earned not through bloodline alone, but through daily tenderness, scholarly exchange, and quiet, feminine strength. You pass a tapestry unfinished, its threads glowing in the firelight. It depicts a crowned eagle beside a single rose. No signature, no title, just a symbol. And you wonder, did one of the daughters weave this? Did Gisela place the rose? These women, rarely named in war chronicles, held together the fabric of the realm just as surely as any king, through letters, laws, and lullabies. Through faith, wit, and stubborn resilience. And now, as the palace settles into silence and the moonlight brushes the tiled roofs, you drift asleep beside the whisper of their voices, soft, strong, and stitched forever into the seams of history. You awaken to the distant sound of iron striking wood, a rhythm both ominous and inevitable. The air is sharper now, the trees taller and darker. You are deep in the North Saxon lands, dense with pine and quiet with the ancient traditions. The year is 772 and the wars have begun. These are not the sweeping, glamorous campaigns of heroic poetry. They are cold, grim, and grinding. The Saxon wars will stretch across decades longer than most kings rule, longer than some lives last. Charlemagne, ever persistent, has decided that these pagan peoples to his northeast must be brought into the Christian fold. But the Saxons, they have other plans. You watch as a wooden idol is toppled the Irminsul, a sacred pillar of the Saxons, said to hold up the heavens. Charlemagne's forces chop it down with solemn efficiency. To some in his court, it is a necessary blow for the faith. To others, it is a declaration of eternal resistance. The forest, in its silence, says nothing, but you sense its memory will be long. Charlemagne establishes camps and outposts along the Weser and Elbe rivers. Fortresses rise where sacred groves once stood. Missionaries walk behind the soldiers, preaching in halting Saxon, offering baptism in muddy rivers, and coaxing confessions from bewildered villagers. You pass a baptismal ceremony where warriors kneel with clenched jaws, clearly reluctant. Some accept the faith out of exhaustion, others out of fear, and still others perhaps out of genuine curiosity. One man, a chieftain named Hesse, is baptized before a crowd, wearing his ceremonial wolf pelt and staring blankly at the cross as if waiting for it to speak. But for every baptism, a rebellion. The most famous of these leaders is Widukind, a Saxon noble who becomes a symbol of resistance. He is elusive, charismatic, and for a long time, nearly untouchable. You hear his name whispered around firesides and scribbled nervously in court letters. One soldier remarks, "He disappears like smoke and strikes like thunder." And here is where the story grows more difficult. These campaigns are long and brutal. Charles returns again and again to Saxony, sometimes with priests, sometimes with armies, often with both. There are treaties made and broken, oaths sworn and forsaken. It's less like a war and more like an unresolved conversation shouted across blooded fields. One quirky, little-known detail from these campaigns sticks with you in one village. A Saxon elder offered Charles a gift of fermented milk, goat wool, and a carved wooden owl. The meaning was never entirely understood. Was it defiance, a peace offering, a mockery? Historians still debate its intent, but the object itself, surprisingly, was preserved and stored in Aachen. There are darker moments too. In 782, after a particularly violent uprising, Charlemagne orders the execution of 4,500 captured Saxons near Verden. It is the most controversial act of his reign. The sources differ on the details. Some suggest it was a calculated punishment. Others imply it may have spiraled out of control. Historians are still divided. Was it a necessary show of strength or a misjudgment cloaked in religious justification? What you do know is this: Charles is not a cold man. You've seen him pause in gardens, whisper to his daughters, argue with bishops over scriptural nuance. But here, in Saxony, something hardens, whether it's frustration, duty, or a belief that unity must come before mercy. It's clear that peace will not come easily. And yet, amidst all this, something soft glimmers in the edges. At one village chapel, you witness a Saxon boy helping a Frankish monk light candles. They speak only broken words, but they laugh at the same Latin mispronunciations. Across the camp, a soldier carves a scene into his shield not of battle, but of trees, stars, and a river. You realize something: conquest may be the loudest part of history, but coexistence is its quiet undercurrent. By the 790s, Widukind finally surrenders. He is baptized publicly, with Charles as his godfather. The moment is heavy with symbolism. Some say it marks the end of the Saxon resistance. Others argue it was merely a pause, a form of resignation rather than acceptance. You stand in a pine grove where monks now teach children, and soldiers have begun planting apple trees. The forest is not what it was, but neither is the empire. Both have changed, and both bear the marks of the other. As night drapes the land in a cool hush, you lie beside a stream where frogs croak and stars peek through tall branches. Somewhere in the distance, a chapel bell rings softly. Peace may not yet reign in Saxony, but tonight, at least, the axes rest. You awaken in the stillness of a cloister where the air smells of parchment, candle smoke, and distant rain. You're no longer on a battlefield or in the shadow of a fallen idol. Now, your steps echo softly across polished stone as you wander through the quiet heart of Charlemagne's most lasting achievement, his revival of learning. It is the early 780s, and the Carolingian court is humming not with the clash of swords, but with the rustle of manuscripts and the low murmur of debate. The Carolingian Renaissance, as it would come to be called, is not a sudden eruption, but a steady glow kindled by kingship, warmed by scholarship, and spread by the flick of a scribe's wrist. You pass through the palace school at Aachen, where boys of noble and common birth alike sit cross-legged on woven mats, mouthing Latin declensions under the guidance of robed tutors. At the front of the room, Alcuin of York holds up a scroll, his voice gentle but firm, his eyebrows forever arched in patient amusement. Charlemagne is there too, not just in name but in presence. He often attends lessons himself, not as a student exactly, but as a companion. He asks questions, he debates grammar, he marvels at the clarity of Roman law, then grumbles about its vagueness in the next breath. You hear him chuckle one afternoon as a boy misreads a verse of Virgil, transforming a noble hero into a fishmonger. Laughter spreads like warm honey through the stone chamber. Charles can't write, not fluently. Despite his many attempts wax tablets tucked under pillows, practice sessions by firelight, his hand never learned the shapes his mind so dearly loved. But he reads voraciously, history, theology, law, astronomy, even curious pagan texts copied from old Roman vaults. He values knowledge the way others value gold, as something to store, refine, and share. A lesser-known moment unfolds in the library, where a young monk named Theodulf is working on standardizing biblical texts. He mutters in both Latin and Gothic, correcting a scribe who had mistaken a psalm's mercy for bitterness. Charles walks in and listens, quietly. Then he nods and says, "Even God's word needs a good editor." Theodulf smiles, and the joke is later recorded in the margins of the very manuscript he was revising. You wander through these halls, drawn not by monuments, but by motion. Everything here is being copied, refined, and ordered. You peek over a scribe's shoulder as he perfects a rounded new handwriting, Carolingian minuscule. It is clean, elegant, and easy to read. A script designed not to impress, but to communicate. You'll see it in centuries to come, echoed in the print of Gutenberg and the textbooks of distant futures. And it's not just letters. Music, too, is being codified. You drift into a chapel where monks are singing in the Frankish twilight. Their tones are measured, written down in early Numi's precursors to musical notation, a new kind of order imposed not by blade, but by breath. You notice something else the curriculum extends beyond boys. At court, Charles's daughters continue to study music, languages, and poetry. One of them even composes short verses in Latin, nothing scandalous, just tender observations about birds and gardens. These verses survive in fragments, tucked into the back pages of household inventories, and there are schools beyond the palace now. Cathedral schools, monastic schools, even village schools, where literacy is spreading like seeds on spring wind. Charles encourages bishops and abbots to open their doors to teaching. The result is quiet, invisible, but revolutionary. Not all approve, of course. Some nobles grumble that letters are for priests, not warriors. Others scoff at the use of royal funds for ink and quills. But Charles holds firm. In one letter, he writes that a king without wisdom is like a shepherd without a staff, able to see his flock, but unable to guide it. Scholars still debate the scope of this renaissance. Was it truly widespread, or mostly confined to court and cloister? Did the reforms reach the countryside? The answer, as with most things, lies somewhere in between. What's clear is that the seeds were planted and many took root. As evening falls, you find yourself in the scriptorium, a long room lit with oil lamps, the air thick with ink and concentration. A monk dips his quill and scratches out a sentence about St. Augustine. Another illuminates a capital letter with gold leaf, careful not to breathe too hard. Charles stands silently in the doorway, arms crossed, just watching. You imagine him thinking, these are my true armies. These are the builders of tomorrow, outside. The rain has stopped, the stones glisten. You sit beneath the cloister arches and listen to the echo of a learning, a whisper that will one day resound through cathedrals, parliaments, and printing presses. In the hush of the night, no banners wave, no trumpets sound, but something profound has begun, and it glows not on shields or crowns, but on vellum. You awaken beneath rising scaffolds and the scent of wet mortar. Above you, arches curve skyward like cupped hands. You're in Aachen once more, but it is no longer a rustic court nestled by thermal springs. It is becoming a vision, rising stone by stone, and at the centre of it all stands the Palatine Chapel. It is the late 780s, Charlemagne. Now a seasoned king and scholar patron has begun to manifest his dream in marble and mosaic. He wants more than a throne. He wants a sanctuary of memory, a place where God is honoured, Rome is echoed, and power speaks softly through symmetry. The chapel's structure is unfamiliar in these northern lands. Octagonal, domed, distinctly Byzantine in flavour. You hear murmurs among craftsmen who wonder how such an eastern shape has arrived here in the west. The answer lies in Charles's vision, a fusion of the Christian world. He has studied Roman basilicas, visited the Lombard churches of Ravenna, and now commissions Odo of Metz to make something neither purely Frankish nor fully Roman, but both and more. You pass under temporary ladders and hear the clang of chisels. The stone is local, but the style is not. Marble columns, some recycled from Roman ruins, stand polished in the morning light. Gilded mosaics begin to shimmer along the apse. The ceiling will be high, almost dizzyingly so, not for grandeur alone, but to remind worshippers to look upward. Within the chapel's rising walls, you find Charles speaking with a bishop about the placement of relics, small bones, bits of cloth, things that carry spiritual gravity. He is not aloof or distant, but precise. He wants a reliquary to sit just so, a candle to burn at this angle, a psalm to be sung in that key. He understands the language of devotion as a builder understands timber. One curious, almost charming debate erupts among the workers, whether the chapel's bronze doors should be engraved with floral motifs or geometric knots. Charles, when consulted, chooses both. Heaven is not one pattern, he says, but many threads woven in peace. You step into the chapel's central space, still incomplete, yet already magnificent. Light spills through high windows in fractured beams. There is no incense yet, but you can almost smell it, imagined from the future. The floor's patterns are complex and precise, designed not to impress but to evoke eternity. It is in this chapel that Charles begins to host his most solemn ceremonies, baptisms, debates, festivals of saints. The acoustics surprise even the monks. A single voice, raised in chant, trembles through the dome like a string of pearls spilling across marble. A lesser-known anecdote reaches your ears one night, after the workers had gone home and the chapel sat quiet. Charles is said to have returned alone. He lit a single candle and walked its octagonal paths in silence. A guard overheard him whispering a psalm, not reciting it, but praying it. Some say this moment marked a shift in him, from a ruler of peoples to a servant of something larger. Others dismiss the tale as invention. Historians still debate whether the story came from a monk's imagination or an eyewitness, but it lingers like candle smoke in the rafters. You step outside as the bells begin to toll. The city of Aachen has changed. Craftsmen from across the empire gather here, now Lombards, Franks, Saxons, even some from beyond the Pyrenees. They trade tools and ideas with equal reverence. A sculptor from Ravenna shows young Frank how to shape lions on a baptismal font. A scribe from Tours teaches minuscule to a Saxon boy who cannot yet read but knows beauty when he sees it. Charles watches this quiet mixing of culture with a satisfaction deeper than pride. He doesn't merely want conquest, he wants harmony, not sameness, but unity. And so, the Palatine Chapel becomes more than a church. It becomes a compass. When travellers approach Aachen, they now see its dome rising like a promise. When bishops meet in its halls, they speak of laws and scripture, but also of roads, schools, and songs. Not every detail of the chapel will survive the centuries. Some mosaics will fade, some relics will be lost. Yet the bones of it, the stone, the shape, the spirit will remain. As the day fades, you find yourself sitting on the outer steps, warmed by the last rays of sun. The chapel bells echo through the hills like a heartbeat. You close your eyes and imagine them ringing not just across Aachen, but across time through every cathedral to come, every court that remembers his name. Here, beneath domes and dreams, Charlemagne builds a prayer in stone. You awaken in a lamplit chamber heavy with scrolls and silence. The walls are lined with wooden shelves, each stacked with vellum, wax tablets, and small bundles of wool-bound parchment. You're not in a church, nor a palace, but something between the two. This is a place where policy is born not with swords or banners, but with ink. The year is now in the early 790s. The empire has grown vast, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Slavic lands, from Saxony down into Italy and parts of Spain. And with such sprawl comes complexity. You sit beside a long oaken table where Charlemagne's clerks draft the documents that stitch his empire together, the capitularies. Capitularies are not laws in the modern sense. They are instructions, chaptered decrees issued by the king to bishops, counts, and nobles. Some outline taxation, others describe how to treat orphans. A few even regulate the price of bread or the honesty of merchant scales. You watch a young scribe dip his quill, carefully copying the king's words. Let every man keep the peace, and if not, let the missi know. The missi dominici royal envoys ride in pairs throughout the empire, one cleric, one layman. Their mission to deliver the king's will, ensure justice, and report disobedience. A travelling conscience for a sprawling crown. You pass through a side room where one envoy is preparing to leave. He carries 2 bags, one with sealed letters, another with a small silver cross and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. For justice and the road, he says, smiling. One peculiar capitulary you glimpse includes an entire paragraph on what to do if a bishop's horse gets stolen during a council meeting. It's oddly specific, almost humorous, and yet you sense that this, too, is part of empire addressing the mundane with the same gravity as the divine. Not everyone reads or obeys these instructions. In the foothills of the Pyrenees, some counts act as kings in all but name. In Saxony, old tribal laws still flicker beneath the Christian surface, and yet something is taking root, even when ignored. The capitularies exist. They are copied, referenced, debated. Authority now travels by parchment as much as by lance. You overhear a noble grumble, too many words for too few swords, but his steward is already memorising the new grain levy and adjusting the tally stones. The scribes work endlessly. One, a woman from a nearby abbey rare, but not unheard of, corrects a Latin verb with careful pride. She's seen the king once from a distance, but swears he nodded at her during a festival mass. Whether true or not, it's enough to fuel her devotion to every looping letter she writes. Scholars today still pore over these capitularies. Some debate whether Charlemagne truly understood how far his words would travel, or how little control he sometimes had over what was done in his name. Others argue he knew exactly what he was building, a state where obedience was taught not just through fear, but through form. Outside, a traveller arrives from Lombardy, bearing a petition written in neat Carolingian script. He speaks of a water dispute between two monasteries, both claiming the same stream. You follow the document as it's carried to the royal chamber, discussed over bread and honey, and finally returned with a single added line in the margin. Let the water be shared, as brothers share the cup. It's not poetry, it's not decree, but it's enough. As the sun sets, you stand at the gates of the scriptoria and watch shadows stretch across the courtyard. A bell rings faintly. Inside, the ink dries on a new page. One line about sheep grazing, another about fasting, another about land inheritance. No grand declarations, just thread after thread in the fabric of empire. And it is here, in the quiet fold of policy, that you sense the shape of something rare. A king who knows that ruling well means ruling with rules, and that even kings must put their will into writing. You drift past the candles one last time. A single sheet lies drying on a rack. It reads simply, Capitular Missorum Generalium, general instructions for all royal envoys. It is long, uneven, and beautifully human. You awaken beneath a pale dawn sky laced with snow across rugged mountain slopes. The air is thin, brisk, and smells faintly of pine and wet stone. You are high in the Pyrenees now, far from the palaces and chapels of Aachen. The year is 778 and Charlemagne is on campaign once more. But this time, it is not Saxony or Lombardy that calls to him. It is Iberia. You find yourself riding among Frankish soldiers winding along treacherous paths, their breath fogging in the morning chill. Charlemagne's gaze is fixed southward, toward the fractured lands of Al-Andalus. Muslim emirs there have quarrelled, and one has sent a request for assistance. Ever the opportunist and self-styled Christian protector, Charlemagne has answered, but it is not a crusade. Those do not yet exist. It is something subtler, murkier, an expedition, perhaps a gesture, a probing step into a land of golden palaces and sun-drenched cities where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish communities flourish in uneven coexistence. You descend with the army into the Ebro Valley, where Zaragoza, the supposed ally, refuses to open its gates. What had been painted as a welcoming alliance turns out to be a mirage. The city's ruler reneges. Supplies dwindle, tempers fray. Charlemagne, not one to linger where he is not wanted, decides to turn back north. But retreat in the mountains is not retreat in peace. And now you approach Roncesvalles Pass. The mountains narrow into a cleft of mist and silence. Pines stretch tall like watching sentinels. The rear guard composed of baggage trains, servants, and a contingent led by Count Roland is last to pass. You sense the tension in the air. Something feels still, too still. Then it comes. The Basques, or maybe local tribes. No one is entirely certain. Attack from above, for a forest and cliffside, a chaotic ambush, no glorious battlefield, no clear lines, just confusion, screaming, and the thud of stones. Roland, a noble and bold warrior, refuses to call for aid. Some say it is pride. Others claim he knew help could not arrive in time. He blows his Oliphant, his great war horn, until it cracks with the force of his breath. His men fight valiantly, but they are overrun. None survive. Charlemagne hears the echoes of the horn from miles ahead. He halts, waits, then presses on, uncertain. By the time his scouts return with the grim news, it is too late. The pass is empty, but for broken shields and silence. You stand now at that narrow place. The snow has melted, and birds call from above. There is no memorial here, only memory. Roland becomes a name that outlives the facts. A century later, monks will reshape the tale into the Song of Roland, casting him as a martyr fallen to Saracens, not mountain tribes. It becomes the first great epic of French literature, though fact has long since yielded to legend. Scholars today still wonder, why didn't Charles turn back? Did he know the danger and accept it? Or was the pass too narrow, the mountain too cruel, the timing simply wrong? The debates endure. But history, like the mountains, offers little in the way of certainties. You leave the pass and return with the king to the plains. Charlemagne is visibly subdued. This failed campaign, and the only real military failure of his reign, lingers like a bruise beneath the armour. He says little of it in the years to come. No triumphs are declared, no monuments raised, but something shifts in his approach. He begins to focus more intently on internal unity, on the laws, letters, and chapels you've seen rising across the realm. He realizes, perhaps, that the dream of empire is not just carved by conquest, it must be sustained by structure. Still, the story of Roland remains. You hear it sung around fires, embroidered in tapestries, even acted out by children in the palace courtyard. A boy plays Roland with a toy horn. A girl throws imaginary rocks from a balcony, giggling. The past becomes play. The tragedy becomes tale. One charming footnote in the court inventories of Aachen, there's mention of a cracked Oliphant horn, rumoured to be Roland's. Its origins are unverified, of course. But Charles kept it close, tucked into the treasury, not among weapons, but among relics. And so, the failed Iberian expedition takes its place not in glory, but in myth. You walk the quiet road north with the returning soldiers, past orchards and abbeys, past the flickering torches of border towns. The empire has not expanded, but it has learned, and sometimes that too is power. As twilight descends on the mountain trails, you pause once more at the mouth of Roncevaux. The wind sighs softly between the peaks. A single pine cone falls to the forest floor, and somewhere in the distance you almost hear the faint echo of a horn that once shattered silence. You awaken in the gentle bustle of a Frankish market town, where carts creak, coins jingle, and the smell of fresh bread competes with that of tanned leather and wet hay. It's a quiet kind of liveliness, not the roar of conquest, but the murmur of commerce. You're walking through the quieter triumphs of Charlemagne's reign. It is the early 790s, and while soldiers still march and monks still teach, another kind of reform is underway, the weaving of a stronger economy. Charlemagne understands that an empire cannot rest solely on swords and psalms. It must have grain, it must have coins, it must have scales that balance fairly. You pause at a coin maker's booth where silver denier small, round coins bearing the name Carl's Rex, Franco of Yem, are being stacked and inspected. These are among the first standardized coins of the empire, issued under Charlemagne's sweeping currency reform. One weight, one value, one symbol of unity. The denier becomes the backbone of a single currency system, replacing the patchwork of Roman leftovers and local mintings that once confused merchants from town to town. Now, a denier in Paris will carry the same value as one in Lombardy or Saxony. Trade flourishes slowly, quietly, as uncertainty recedes. You walk past a merchant counting coins with methodical patience, then double-checking his scales. He nods to an official who carries a small block of polished stone used to test weights. It's one of Charlemagne's newer policies regulating measurements. A pound, a foot, a bushel, all standardized. Not glamorous, but revolutionary in its way. A baker waves you over and explains, with a smile, that he no longer needs to argue about how much flour is enough when trading with the next village. Now we both mean the same thing when we say a pound, he says, holding up a wooden scoop carved with a neat line. One quirky detail, a preserved capitulary from this period lists punishments for altering weights. In one version, a dishonest merchant might be paraded through town with his falsified measure tied to his neck, public embarrassment as policy. Harsh, yes, but also a reflection of how seriously trust was treated. You pass through a granary, where sacks of barley are stacked beside jars of honey and oil. Here too, Charlemagne's reach has arrived. Agricultural records are being kept more carefully now, thanks to royal encouragement. Counts and abbots are asked to send reports on harvests, rainfall, and surplus grain. It's not perfect. In some regions, local customs still govern trade. Not every official enforces these reforms with equal vigour, but slowly, a sense of consistency is forming, and that consistency becomes confidence. Roads that once carried only soldiers now carry merchants, carts, and travelling monks with books tucked beside bolts of cloth. Scholars still discuss the scope of this economic reform. Was it truly empire-wide, or mostly symbolic evidence shows that while the system wasn't airtight, it was influential, especially in urban centres and monastic estates, which began acting like small economic hubs. Back at court, Charlemagne continues to review ledgers with the same intensity he gives to psalms. He speaks with advisors about surplus, livestock, and river transport. His interest is not theatrical. He knows that stability is built not just from treaties, but from wheat. His personal estate at Aachen is said to be well organised, with clear records of animal husbandry and vegetable yields. He even issues instructions on the proper planting of herbs and the care of orchards. And here, nestled among all this structure, you find a human moment. In a letter preserved from this era, Charlemagne expresses quiet frustration that some of his royal agents have reported false numbers. "Let those who lie about their harvest remember," he writes, "that God sees all accounts. Even if I do not, it's half threat, half weary lament. The economy doesn't sparkle in the same way battles or coronations do. But in the ticking of markets, the weighing of cheese, the smooth circulation of a silver coin, you feel the pulse of an empire learning to breathe steadily. You return to the market square. A boy is trading nuts for wool. A monk counts salted fish beside a travelling potter. A blacksmith displays nails, horseshoes, and an iron ploughshare engraved with a simple sunburst, his own maker's mark. Even here, beneath the canopy of stalls and chatter, the shadow of Charlemagne falls lightly but unmistakably, not through force, but through order. And as evening rolls over the rooftops, you hear the clink of a coin dropped into a beggar's hand. It is a small act, but it rings with a kind of faith, not in gods or kings, but in the idea that something shared can be something sacred. You close your eyes to the lull of trade and torchlight. The world of weight and wheat is quiet, but never still. You awaken in the soft hush of a private garden tucked behind palace walls. The air is thick with the scent of rosemary, quince blossoms, and warm stone. It is late afternoon, and you're in the royal estate at Aachen, where the question of inheritance stirs as subtly as wind through the leaves. It is the late 790s, and Charlemagne's empire now spans rivers, mountains, and tongues. But what will become of it when he is gone? You find yourself among tutors, pages, and young nobles, all orbiting around the emperor's sons. Charles, now older and greyer, begins thinking not only of eternity, but of succession. His children are many, at least 18 across his lifetime, but today 3 sons take precedence: Charles the Younger, Pepin of Italy, and Louis of Aquitaine. Each has been granted a portion of the empire to govern. Each carries the weight of a name both proud and precarious. You observe Charles the Younger practicing horsemanship in the courtyard, confident, broad-chested, and already wearing a miniature crown in courtly pageants. He resembles his father in build, but not entirely in thought. Some say he lacks the patience, the careful ear for counsel that his father honed over decades. Pepin, named after Charlemagne's father, rules Italy from Pavia. His court mimics Aachen, but bears its own flavour: Roman ruins, Lombard customs, and the scent of olives rather than pine. He shows promise, especially in matters of law and administration, and yet distance breeds independence, and Pepin sometimes writes with a tone that makes his father raise an eyebrow. Then there is Louis, the quietest of the 3, thoughtful, reserved, more pious than political. He governs Aquitaine with care, prefers chapel services to feasts, and is rarely heard raising his voice. Some wonder if he has the mettle to rule the whole empire. Others suggest his calm may be his greatest strength. A lesser-known moment unfolds one spring morning. Charlemagne calls all 3 sons to Aachen and tests them, not in battle drills or courtly games, but in debate. The topic: whether a just king should first serve God, the law, or the people. Their answers vary. Charles speaks of honour. Pepin speaks of order. Louis, after a long pause, says, "A king must learn to serve all 3 and know when each must yield." Charlemagne does not answer, but he nods slowly. You pass through the royal chapel, where prayers are said not only for victories but for unity among heirs. The court knows that succession has shattered kingdoms before. Charles wants no civil war after his death. He issues a document, Divisio Regnorum, dividing his empire among his sons in clear terms. It's not an ideal solution, but a practical one. Better to plan now than leave the crown to fate, and yet fate, as always, has its own designs. In 810, Pepin dies unexpectedly. The news arrives by messenger, late in the evening. Charles sits alone in the chapel for hours. No scribes, no advisers, just him, the candles, and a silence thick with disappointment and sorrow. You see the shift almost immediately. Charles the Younger, once confident, now bears a shadow of impatience. Louis, still ruling in Aquitaine, becomes the quiet focus of the emperor's hopes. Charlemagne revises his plans. The divisions blur. The crown begins to look singular again. Then, just a year later, Charles the Younger dies as well of a sudden illness. 2 heirs gone in as many years. The empire, once carefully partitioned, now narrows to a single surviving son, Louis. Historians debate whether Louis was Charlemagne's first choice or merely his last resort. Some say he was always the best suited, humble, devout, steady. Others argue he lacked the political sharpness of his brothers, and that Charles feared instability more than anything. You drift through the halls of Aachen, where whispers now speak of Louis as co-emperor. He is summoned to court more frequently. His advisers are given seats at royal councils. The coronation is arranged not after Charlemagne's death, but during his lifetime, a gesture of continuity, a hedge against chaos. One charming, almost tender episode is recorded by a court clerk during a winter hunt. Louis loses his way in the forest. Rather than panic, he follows the sound of distant bells and finds a monastery, where he spends the night with the monks, sleeping on a straw mat, sharing bread, and singing psalms. When Charlemagne hears of it, he simply says. Then he knows the shape of humility. That is enough. And now, you sit beside a low stone wall, watching Louis walk with his father through the gardens. They say little, but the closeness is clear. Not just blood, but burden passed hand to hand. Succession in this age is never secure. Emperors die, brothers rebel, maps split. But here, for now, there is a plan, there is a name. And there is a son walking softly in his father's long shadow. The sun lowers, the bells ring once, and somewhere in the chapel, a choir practices the hymn for a future coronation. You close your eyes as the voices rise steady, simple and full of patient hope. You awaken to the scent of spices, the rustle of silk, and the sound of foreign tongues echoing down the halls of Aachen. The sunlight filtering through the windows catches on gold thread and polished metal. This is not a feast day, nor a military council. Today, something far more curious has arrived. Diplomats from the east, their sandals dusty from distant roads, bearing gifts that shimmer with wonder. It is the year 802, and Charlemagne, now an emperor, receives envoys from the Abbasid Caliphate. That's right. You're witnessing one of the strangest, most fascinating moments of his reign. These visitors have come from Baghdad, the glittering heart of the Islamic world, under the rule of Harun al-Rashid, whose name is wrapped in the folds of the Arabian Nights and echoed in stories for centuries to come. What do they bring? You ask treasures beyond the dreams of the Frankish court, silks dyed in impossible colours, a mechanical clock that chimes on the hour, and a chess set carved from ivory and jet. But most famous of all, and most bewildering, is the elephant. You stare, slack-jawed with the rest of Aachen, as a massive white elephant named Lullabies is led through the palace gates. It lumbers with slow dignity, draped in embroidered cloth, flanked by handlers who speak gently in Arabic. No one, not even Charles, has seen anything quite like it. The arrival of Lullabies is not just spectacle, it is diplomacy. Harun al-Rashid, ruling a faraway empire stretching from Egypt to Persia, has sent the elephant as a symbol of mutual recognition. Charlemagne, in return, sends gifts of cloaks, hunting dogs, and intricately bound books. Neither ruler ever meets the other in person, but this exchange speaks louder than 100 treaties. You drift through the palace corridors as courtiers marvel at the animal. Children whisper that it can talk. Clerics debate whether it is mentioned in scripture. Stable boys feed it apples and back away slowly. Awestruck, one monk, in a corner of the library, begins a careful ink drawing of the creature, labelling it Bestia orientalis, the beast from the east. Historians still debate how the exchange came to be. Was it arranged by Jewish merchants travelling through the Mediterranean by Christian emissaries living in Muslim cities? Was the elephant truly a gift, or more of a diplomatic gambit? The records are thin, the details uncertain, and that's part of its magic. It feels more like a fable than fact, but fact it is. One delightfully strange tidbit for years afterward. Royal clerks were instructed to include a boule Abbas in court inventories. One elephant, gifted by the king of the Saracens. They would write in neat Carolingian minuscule. It was both a curiosity and a kind of living relic, a reminder that the world stretched far beyond the empire's borders. Charlemagne himself is said to have enjoyed the elephant's company, often watching it bathed in the river near his estate. There's even an apocryphal story that he once tried to ride it, laughing when the beast refused to move. Likely untrue, but charming nonetheless. And yet, the story has a melancholy end. Around 810, while travelling with the emperor on campaign, Abul Abbas dies in what is now modern-day Germany. Some say it was due to the cold, others blame disease. No monument was raised, no burial recorded, only the briefest mention in a royal chronicle. Still, you walk past a mosaic in Aachen depicting strange beasts, and wonder if one of those shape's long trunk curved tusk was inspired by the emperor's impossible guest. This moment in the story of Charlemagne lingers not because of war, but because of wonder. It reminds you that even in an age of borders and battles, curiosity crossed the mountains, the deserts, and the seas, that a Frankish emperor and an Abbasid Caliph could, for a brief flicker of time, exchange gifts of thought and animal and silence. You sit now beneath a fig tree planted in the palace gardens. Its fruit is not native to these lands. It came, they say, with the same envoys who brought the elephant. A court gardener carefully covers its roots in straw each winter, protecting it from frost. Above you, the sun is warm. The breeze carries the smell of cinnamon and cardamom from a kitchen experimenting with unfamiliar recipes. Nearby, a monk hums a tune he claims to have learned from one of the travellers. And you, silent guest in this moment of strange, gentle diplomacy, feel something rare, the breath of distant worlds meeting, not in conflict, but in curiosity. You awaken in a quiet hall lit with long windows and the faint flicker of candlelight. The morning is peaceful, domestic, and deceptively simple. You're inside Charlemagne's court, but not the council chamber, not the chapel, and certainly not the battlefield. This time, you find yourself in the emperor's private dining space, where the scent of broth and warm barley bread greets you like an old friend. The year is somewhere between campaign seasons. No one marks it precisely. The rhythm of empire hums on. But here in this quiet room, you discover something unexpected. Charlemagne is not a man of lavish tastes. You watch as he sits at a plain wooden table, not alone, but not surrounded by pomp either. His daughters are here, embroidering in the corner. A handful of advisors whisper over their notes. A servant brings in a bowl of peas and grilled fish seasoned with parsley, perhaps a pinch of imported salt. There's no golden plate, no crystal goblet, just solid utensils, clay jugs of watered wine, and the soft crackle of the fire. Charlemagne eats slowly, thoughtfully. You notice he favours whole grains and fruit, often choosing simple stews over extravagant roasts. Despite the empire's wealth, he prefers modest meals, sometimes prepared by his household staff. including his daughters, who are known to take turns arranging his place settings or brewing herbal drinks for his digestion. A charming and oft-forgotten detail, Charlemagne had a particular fondness for roasted onions, eaten with vinegar and a touch of honey. A palace steward once recorded a recipe for imperial onion paste, which involved slow cooking the bulbs until they turned to silk. Whether it truly soothed the emperor's stomach or simply pleased his palate is anyone's guess. You pass into the music room, where the emperor often retreats in the evening. His daughters are gathered here again, Rotrud plucking the harp, Bertha reading aloud from a verse of Augustine. There is laughter, there is singing, there is warmth, though never crowned queens. The emperor's daughters were given unusually prominent places in court life. They were educated, eloquent, and trusted deeply by their father. He famously refused to marry them off to foreign princes, preferring their companionship to any political advantage such marriages might offer. This choice puzzled many. Ambassadors from Lombardy, Bavaria, even Byzantium were politely turned away. The question has lingered ever since: was it possessiveness, politics, or perhaps a quiet act of resistance against the tradition that reduced royal women to bargaining chips? Historians are still unsure. The daughters themselves left no clear writings, but their presence constant, intelligent, and integral remains undeniable. You walk with them in the garden, where they tend to herbs and pick mulberries. They discuss astronomy, theology, and household management. They help administer portions of the palace estate. Some even compose poetry. These women are not idle ornaments. They are, by all available accounts, central to the court's daily rhythm. And their father, he enjoys their company deeply. Several chronicles note how Charlemagne dined with them almost every evening, listened to their music, and took genuine interest in their observations. You spot a fragment of that affection one chilly morning. Charlemagne walks with Gisela, his youngest daughter, and adjusts her cloak so it won't drag through the dewy grass. No servant rushes to do it, no bishop records it, but you remember it because it's the kind of moment that defines not a ruler, but a man. Back inside, a court poet recites a verse comparing the emperor's court to the harmony of a well-tuned lyre. Each string, though different, sings the same truth when plucked by a wise hand. You wonder if the poet means the council, or perhaps the daughters, or both. Later, in the evening, you overhear a scholar murmur a soft jest: even Jupiter dined alone. But Charlemagne prefers an audience of women with opinions. There's no sarcasm in his voice, only amusement and, perhaps, a hint of admiration. One final note catches your attention. A visitor to the court once remarked that the emperor, though surrounded by power and prestige, was most himself when seated at a plain table, listening to a hymn sung in imperfect harmony by his children. He smiled more at their missed notes, the visitor wrote, than at the victory songs of generals. And that, perhaps, is the soul of this chapter. Here in the folds of daily life meals shared, music played, cloaks adjusted, you find the Charlemagne rarely carved in stone or sung in songs, not the conqueror, not the emperor, but the father, the listener, the man with a taste for onions and a laugh that lingered longer than any decree. As the evening darkens, you settle into a corner beside the warm hearth. The harp continues softly. The conversation fades to whispers. Outside, the scent of chamomile drifts in through an open window, and within these walls the empire sleeps not in triumph, but in trust. You awaken to the low clink of keys and the soft rustle of parchment. The sun is barely up, but already the women of the court are awake, tending to their duties with the kind of quiet precision that doesn't seek credit, only continuation. You're still in Aachen, but you've stepped away from the emperor's table and into the domain of those whose names rarely make it into annals, yet whose hands hold the keys, sometimes quite literally. This is the world of the Carolingian queens, consorts, and noblewomen, not always crowned, and rarely titled in the way their influence deserved. They nonetheless shaped policy, patronage, and palace life in ways subtle but lasting. You walk now beside a noblewoman named Fastrada, Charlemagne's fourth wife and one of his most politically engaged partners. She's reviewing estate reports in the garden cloister, dictating notes to a clerk while her maid checks the quality of linen arriving from a distant monastery. Fastrada is often remembered for being firm, even severe, particularly in how she dealt with rebellious nobles. Some chronicles cast her in a cold light, perhaps too quick to punish, too sharp in her counsel. But step closer, and you'll hear something different. Her advice to the emperor is measured, her correspondence thoughtful. One letter she sends to a bishop addresses not war or discipline, but education and the treatment of orphans. It is signed with her own seal. After her death, Charlemagne grieves deeply. He writes to religious houses asking for prayers, and he even sends offerings on her behalf, wheat, wine, and wax. That is not the act of a man unmoved. Later, you encounter Luitgard, his last wife, a noble Alemannic woman with a love for poetry and theology. She engages with scholars at court, often inviting them to her private quarters for readings and discussions. One poem from this era, anonymous but beautifully constructed, describes a queen whose voice flows like ink over vellum, firm and full of warmth. You see her sitting in a side chapel, speaking in hushed Latin with the deacon about the psalms. Her posture is regal, but her tone is curious. This is no performance. She is here to learn. Not all queens had official crowns. Some were more like companions or partners in governance. Charlemagne's relationships with his wives and concubines varied. Marriage, in this age, was fluid, part alliance, part affection, part custom. His children by these women, both legitimate and not, were often raised side by side, schooled together, trained for court service. The boundaries, though real, were not always rigid. You move now through the palace archives, where a group of noble women are inspecting household accounts. They oversee textiles, livestock, seasonal produce, and servant wages. They send letters to abbots, approve clothing shipments for monasteries, and even intervene in minor legal disputes. One delightful anecdote emerges from a household scroll. A countess in the emperor's household once halted a shipment of wine because the barrels were improperly sealed. She insisted on testing the quality herself, much to the chagrin of the cellar master. Her verdict too sharp for the chapel, but fine for the soldiers. She had it relabelled accordingly. These women queens, concubines, daughters, sisters form an invisible lattice beneath the empire's weight. They write letters, manage estates, raise children, and settle disputes, all while maintaining the complex etiquette of court life. When the emperor is on campaign, they sometimes serve as intermediaries between nobles, scribes, and abbots. A letter from Charles to one of his daughters includes instructions on handling a property dispute in Thuringia, an acknowledgement of her authority. Historians have long debated how much power these women truly held. Some argue it was informal, derived more from access than title. Others suggest they exercised real influence behind the scenes, especially when their counsel aligned with spiritual or logistical matters. What's clearer now, in modern readings of the records, is that they were far from passive. You pass through a workshop where women are weaving altar cloths embroidered with gold thread and tiny pearls. The designs aren't random, they depict psalms, imperial symbols, even moments from court life. One features the emperor seated beneath a tree, flanked by two women offering scrolls. The names are not labelled, but you know their presence was real, even if the ink of history failed to catch them clearly. As evening arrives, you return to the garden, where the scent of thyme and sage wafts through the cool air. The women of the court are gathering for prayer, their voices, soft but certain, rise in Latin verse. They do not shout, they do not demand, and yet the empire listens. You sit beneath a fig tree as the last rays of sun brush the chapel dome. Somewhere, a clerk adds a line to the day's record. It mentions a delivery of wool overseen by a queen, a council note from a daughter, a letter sealed in crimson wax by a hand history nearly forgot. And still, the story remains written not in thunder, but in thread. You awaken to the soft scratch of quill on vellum. The sound is rhythmic, soothing like the turning of pages in a gentle breeze. The room is filled with lamplight and the faint smell of damp parchment and beeswax. You're in the scriptorium of a Carolingian monastery, and this, my dear sleepy listener, is where history changes shape one curved letter at a time. It is the early 800s, and Charlemagne's passion for learning has seeped deep into the fabric of his empire. Schools now dot the land, tucked inside cathedrals and monasteries, where young boys chant Latin verbs between bites of coarse bread. But here, in the quiet workrooms of scribes, a quieter revolution is unfolding the birth of a new way to write. You peer over the shoulder of a scribe bent low over a sheet of vellum. His ink is made from oak galls and iron salts, and he works with slow reverence. His letters are rounded, are spacious, and wonderfully readable. Gone are the cramped, angular strokes of earlier centuries. In their place, Carolingian minuscule script so legible, so elegant, that it will shape European writing for centuries to come. The emperor didn't invent it, of course, but he promoted it with purpose. You might say he saw the chaos of tangled scripts and did what he always did. Brought order, under his encouragement. Scholars like Alcuin of York, Peter of Pisa, and Theodulf of Orleans helped refine the form. It became the standard script for imperial documents, educational texts, and religious manuscripts alike. You watch as the scribe dips his quill again. The letters curve like quiet music in principio erat verbum. In the beginning was the word. One charming little fact, some of the earliest examples of Carolingian minuscule contain doodles in the margins, tiny dogs, grinning monks, and even a frog in a cowl. Scribes worked long hours, and sometimes their minds wandered. One even wrote a note in Latin beside a smudged line. I sneezed while writing this. Forgive the blot. You chuckle softly and continue through the scriptorium. This is no static library. It's a hive. A monk is busy copying a Roman legal code, while across the room, another works on a botanical manual. One clerk transcribes a prayer book for a nearby village, another prepares a charter confirming land for a convent. The variety of texts is staggering: sermons, poems, laws, hymns, herbal recipes, and school primers. The Carolingian Renaissance, as it would later be called, isn't a flood of new inventions, it's a preservation project, a great sweeping effort to rescue the knowledge of the ancients before time wears it away completely. And here's the twist: much of what we know about ancient Rome today survives because of these scribes. Without their careful copying, countless works would have vanished. Cicero, Virgil, Ovid, even fragments of Tacitus. They come to us not through grand statues or marble libraries, but through tired monks hunched over desks in draughty stone rooms. There's a scholarly debate still simmering over just how widespread literacy became under Charlemagne. Some historians argue it was limited mostly to clerics and elite boys. Others point to evidence that literacy expanded even to merchants and lower-ranking officials. The truth, as ever, lies somewhere between. But there's no doubt the emperor lit a fire that would smoulder through the Middle Ages. You find yourself beside a woman carefully binding pages into a leather cover. She's from a noble family, educated at an abbey, and now helps oversee the production of liturgical texts. Her fingers are stained with dye from the red capital letters rubrics that help guide the reader through each section. She shows you a nearly finished book, a psalter with gold initials and an ornate incipit page adorned with vine leaves and birds. It's beautiful. But what's more, it's readable. You can make out every word. That is the miracle of Carolingian minuscule, not its flourish, but its clarity. Outside the window, the snow has begun to fall. A boy runs past, clutching a wax tablet and laughing as a goose chases him from the courtyard. Within these stone walls, the scribes carry on, mostly silent, occasionally smiling. A fire crackles in the hearth, somewhere nearby. Bells chime softly, marking the hours. And in this quiet moment, you realise something: Charlemagne's most enduring legacy may not be a crown, or a conquest, or a chapel. It may be a style of writing, a way of seeing thought made visible, a gift to the future wrapped not in gold leaf, but in the humble scratch of ink on vellum. You curl up beside a stack of books, warmed by their presence. They carry the voices of 100 vanished writers, preserved by the steady hands of scribes who never sought fame, only fidelity. The page turns, and the empire writes on. You awaken to the sound of wind skimming across frozen thatch, its chill seeping through wooden shutters and stone walls. The fire in the hearth has burned low, and even your breath feels quiet this morning. You're in Paderborn, Charlemagne's winter court in the Saxon lands, a place once soaked in rebellion, now slowly folding into the empire's rhythm, or at least that is the plan. It is the early 800s. The snows have settled deep across the fields, and travel is slow. And so, for several months each year, the court moves here, far from Aachen's scholarly bustle, into the realm of icy negotiations, border talks, and careful diplomacy. You walk through the halls of the timber-framed palace, where icicles drip lazily from the eaves, and woolen tapestries have been doubled to keep out the cold. Servants bustle about with steaming buckets, placing warm stones under chairs. But the emperor has been up since dawn. You find him in a hall lit with horn-covered windows, seated with the envoys from the Slavic lands. Their fur cloaks shed frost as they bow, presenting carved gifts: bare claws, obsidian blades, a golden torque. Charlemagne receives them with his usual mix of curiosity and calculation. He speaks to them not just as king, but as a mapmaker of minds. He wants to know their customs, their leaders, their rivers and roads. Later, Danish envoys arrive, their speech clipped and spare, their eyes scanning every gesture in the room. You notice that the tone shifts. Charles becomes firmer, more formal. The Danes have grown restless along the empire's northern border. Rumours swirl about a tall warrior king named Godfred gathering strength across the sea. No battles yet, but the snow muffles tension. These talks are quiet wars in themselves. Words instead of weapons, gifts instead of threats. You overhear a courtier whisper that one envoy slipped a dagger beneath his robe, just in case, but nothing comes of it. Instead, the day ends with spiced wine, cautious nods, and a renewed agreement fragile as frost, but holding. You step outside to walk the snowy courtyard. The air stings, but the sky is clear. A group of palace children skitter across the ice on handmade skates, giggling as a court tutor tries to keep up. Over by the stables, a Saxon woman wraps cloth around a newborn calf's legs, murmuring a song in her native tongue. The language is softer now, no longer a secret, just a background melody in the empire's slow harmonization. One curious fact, Paderborn, though temporary in season, was once the site of a grand public debate between Christian theologians and pagan Saxon priests. Records suggest that Charlemagne encouraged the event not as spectacle, but as policy. The goal wasn't conversion by sword, but by reason. Whether or not the debate changed minds is unknown, but the fact it occurred at all is quietly astonishing. As you pass the scribes' quarters, you find them layering their robes and copying documents with gloved hands. Charters, letters, tax records, all carried by horseback to and from Aachen despite the snow. Some are addressed to the Pope, others to distant monasteries. One is simply a request for more candles. You find the Emperor again that evening, sitting beside a large tiled stove, boots drying by the hearth. He is reading not aloud, but to himself. A commentary on the Book of Job, annotated by Alcuin. He frowns slightly, not at the meaning, but at the ink smudge on the corner. His daughters enter with baskets of warm bread and thick woolen socks. A sleepy dog pads in behind them and curls at his feet. No state ceremony, no gold, just the hum of winter and the rhythm of family. There's a historical question that lingers around Paderborn. Was it ever meant to be a permanent capital, a true rival to Aachen? Some argue it was a symbolic centre placed deliberately in the formerly rebellious Saxon heartland as a statement of unity. Others think it was simply practical, closer to key frontiers, and more manageable during harsh months. The answer, like so many, is probably both. And so, the empire breathed through winter, not in parades or pageants, but in these quiet layers, a treaty signed, a cow fed, a song hummed in 2 languages at once. As you settle into a warm corner beneath an archway of pine beams, you hear the bells ring for vespers. The sky outside is now silver with stars, snow muffles footsteps, and Paderborn, once a place of conquest, is now a place of pause. Tomorrow, the court will resume its work. Messengers will ride, scribes will write, envoys will argue and eat and agree. But tonight the empire sleeps, and so do you. You awaken to the sound of distant bells and the rustle of Roman banners unfurling in the December breeze. The air smells of incense and pine needles, and a strange hush sits over the city, not the silence of sleep, but the reverent stillness of something about to begin. You are in Rome. The year is 800 and the city feels ancient, even to those who live within it. Columns rise like cracked teeth from the earth. Ruins lean into ivy and dust, and yet amidst the decay, a strange ceremony is unfolding, one that will echo across centuries. You walk alongside Charlemagne as he makes his way through the narrow Roman streets towards St. Peter's Basilica. He is older now, his beard flecked with white, his step still strong but slower. He wears no imperial crown. Not yet. He is still, in his own eyes, king of the Franks and the Lombards, protector of the church. But that is about to change. Inside the basilica, it is Christmas Day. The church glows with torchlight. Psalms float in the air like fog. The marble floor is cold, but the atmosphere burns with significance. Pope Leo III stands at the altar, waiting. And then, without fanfare, without forewarning, he steps forward, raises a golden crown, and places it gently on Charlemagne's head. Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans. The title had not been used in the West since the fall of the last Roman emperor in 476. Now, nearly 325 years later, it has returned, and it rests on the head of a Frankish king, crowned by the Bishop of Rome. The moment is monumental, and yet Charlemagne does not beam with pride. He does not raise his hands in triumph. According to some chroniclers, he is visibly surprised, perhaps even dismayed. Here lies one of the great historical debates. Did Charlemagne know the coronation was coming? Some sources say no, that Pope Leo took him off guard, asserting the church's power to make emperors. Others believe it was planned all along, a careful choreography to bind throne and altar in mutual legitimacy. The truth, as always, lingers somewhere in the shadows. You feel the tension in the room. To some, this moment marks the rebirth of the Western Roman Empire. To others, particularly in Constantinople, it feels like an affront. After all, there already is a Roman emperor, a woman, Empress Irene, ruling the Byzantine Empire. Her reign is not recognized by the Frankish world, but in the East, she is Rome's heir. So who, then, is the true emperor? You step outside into the winter light. Rome seems unchanged. The cats still stalk the forum. The market stalls still sell olives and clay pots. But history has quietly turned. The Western Empire has been reborn, not with legions and marble, but with parchment and blessing. Charlemagne does not stay in Rome long. He returns to Aachen, where his imperial title begins to appear on coins, charters, and seals. Yet he continues to live simply, wearing local wool, eating modest meals, tending to laws and schools. The crown sits lightly, but the implications are heavy. The new title gives him increased authority over bishops and abbots, and he uses it to push reforms even more vigorously. He issues decrees to protect the poor, to standardize ecclesiastical practices, to defend the rights of pilgrims, and yet he never visits Rome again. Was it politics? Was it weariness? Some say he wished to avoid further entanglement with the papacy. Others suggest that Rome had served its purpose. The empire now had a name, a shape, and a future. And Aachen and inland though it may be, was where that future would be built. One delightful detail preserved in a court letter after his coronation. Charlemagne began commissioning imperial robes patterned not after Roman togas, but after his own Frankish tunics, wide-sleeved, belted, and practical. When a Roman bishop complained, he allegedly replied, "If the robes scratch, the empire itches." No one is quite sure if he actually said it, but the phrase endured. Back in Aachen, you find him seated by the fire. reading a letter from the east. The Byzantine court does not recognize his imperial claim, but neither do they challenge it outright. Diplomacy continues, the world adjusts, and so does Charlemagne. He rules not with ceremony, but with stamina. He uses his title not to glorify himself, but to bind together the tangled threads of peoples, laws, and beliefs that stretch across his lands. He is not the emperor of Rome's past. He is the emperor of a new idea, one rooted in Christendom, in Latin learning, in local governance held together by a central will. As night falls, the bells of St. Peter's ring once more faint now, hundreds of miles away, and in Aachen, beneath a winter sky, the crowned emperor kneels in quiet prayer, just as he has done so many times before. The crown rests nearby, not always worn, rarely flaunted, but present, and the empire, like the season, shifts quietly into something new. You awaken to the sound of a plough cutting through frosted soil and the quiet shuffle of boots along a border road. The empire feels stiller now, not stagnant, not diminished but grounded, rooted. It is the early 800s, and Charlemagne is no longer a restless warrior king chasing conquest across Europe. He is an aging emperor focused now on borders, balance, and the gentle art of staying still. You walk beside him one morning in a low mist as he inspects a fortified border outpost near the Danube. The air smells of cedar and damp wool. His beard is fuller now, silvered with age. He rides more slowly, but with the same watchful posture, always scanning the horizon, not for glory, but for cracks. The empire is vast, but not infinite. The age of expansion is ending. The wars that once defined his rule against Saxons, Lombards, and Basques have slowed, and in some cases ceased entirely. The sword rests more often now, but the maps still require attention. Charlemagne focuses on March's buffer zones along the edges of his realm. He installs trusted nobles to oversee these regions, granting them authority to defend, administer, and, if needed, negotiate with their neighbours. There is the Spanish March in the south, bordering the Islamic territories of Al-Andalus, the Eastern March near the Slavs, the Breton March in the west, a windy place of tangled alliances and quiet rebellion. You join him in a small chapel near the Rhine, where he meets with one of these March lords. They speak of cattle raids, new roads, and whether to build another watchtower near a river bend. It's not glamorous, but it is essential. The empire breathes through these margins, like lungs expanding and contracting at the edges. There is a lovely, lesser-known moment recorded by a palace steward during one of these border visits. Charlemagne stopped to share a meal with a village priest and ended up staying the night, sleeping on straw beside the hearth, because the priest's one bed was already offered to a pregnant traveller. The next day, he left behind a silver brooch and a note in his own handwriting for hospitality finer than gold. His days are filled with such moments now, small visits, quiet assessments, letters sent by trusted riders. He still attends councils, still drafts capitularies, but increasingly he retreats into rhythms of contemplation. He walks more, prays more, reads more, and dreams, perhaps, of how the empire will outlast him. You pass through Aachen once again, and you notice something new, not construction, but restoration. Old buildings are being repaired, roads are being paved, bathhouses built long ago in the Roman style are being cleaned and opened. The Palatine Chapel rings with regular worship. The court feels less like a forge, more like a library. Even in this late season of his reign, Charlemagne maintains a rigorous daily schedule. He rises before dawn, attends mass, reviews reports, dines simply, reads scripture, listens to music, walks the grounds, and hears petitions. The scholars who once tutored him now serve as his advisors. His grandchildren run through the gardens he had planted decades earlier. One point of quiet contention among historians remains: to what extent was Charlemagne aware that the empire he built would begin to fracture after his death? Did he see the fault lines forming, or did he believe the structures, legal, religious, cultural, were strong enough to endure? There are letters from this time, increasingly reflective. In one, he writes of a house built in wind and stone alike, trusting the walls to those who will come after. Another, written to his son Louis, warns gently: the crown is not a helmet. It will not protect you if you forget its weight. And what of Louis? You see him more often now. He is older, calmer, grown into the role with grace. Charlemagne shares power with him in a careful, deliberate way, not as abdication, but as apprenticeship. Louis listens, learns, waits. One crisp autumn morning, you watch father and son walk silently together along a cloister corridor. They pause beneath an arch where ivy clings to ancient Roman stone. Charlemagne reaches up and touches the wall. Even this, he says quietly, was once new. The empire, for all its victories, is not eternal, but in this moment it feels steady. And as the sun begins to fall behind the hills, casting the fields of the Rhineland in gold and shadow, you sense a subtle truth. The greatest legacy of Charlemagne's final years is not land gained, but peace kept. He is not remembered for stopping, but perhaps he should be. Because in these quiet final marches of policy, prayer, and preparation, the old king does something few conquerors manage. He allows his story to soften. You return to the gardens of Aachen one last time. The fig trees are heavy with fruit. The scribes work by open windows. A monk plays the lyre beside a pond where a child drops pebbles, watching the ripples spread outward. The empire no longer expands, but the memory does. You awaken to the sound of footsteps softened by age and hallways warmed by memory. The air in Aachen has shifted: fewer hammers, more hymns. You're still within the palace, but the atmosphere is hushed now, reflective. You walk alongside a man no longer in his prime, but still immensely present Charlemagne, now nearing the final stretch of his long and storied life. It is the winter of 813, outside. Frost curls across the chapel windows, and the garden paths are quiet beneath a layer of snow. Inside, the halls echo less with debate and more with the soft murmur of prayers, family, and legacy. Charlemagne rises earlier than he used to. The aches in his joints are familiar companions now, but he refuses to slow entirely. He walks each morning through the gallery where maps hang, their edges curling. You watch him run his fingers along the borders, perhaps thinking not only of land, but of time. His crown sits unused on most days, resting atop a carved chest. Instead, he wears a thick wool robe and leans more on staff than sceptre. Yet his mind remains keen. He still reads, still dictates letters, still oversees the endless hum of imperial correspondence. In a quiet moment by the fire, he calls for Louis. The moment is not grand, no trumpets, no assembly of nobles, just father and son, standers beside the hearth. Charlemagne formally names Louis as his successor once again. this time not just in writing, but in person. A month later, in September of 813, he will crown Louis as co-emperor in a modest ceremony in Aachen. No pope is present. Charlemagne performs the coronation himself. This is one of the most understated yet powerful gestures of his reign. After all the grandeur of Rome in 800, this final act is quiet, internal, deliberate. It's not about spectacle, it's about certainty. Historians still debate the reason behind this simple ceremony. Was it an effort to bypass papal authority, a signal of confidence in his son, or perhaps just an old man choosing clarity over ceremony? You find yourself in the chapel once more, now complete in its splendour. The mosaics gleam in the candlelight. The octagonal walls cradle sound like a whispering shell. Charlemagne sits alone near the altar, fingers steepled, lips moving in silent prayer, a scribe watching discreetly. Later records that the emperor had begun confessing more often in these final years, not out of fear, but humility. He spoke of unfinished work and walls still rising. He prayed not for forgiveness alone, but for understanding. One charming note tucked into a cleric's diary. Charlemagne had developed a habit of asking for honey with his bread, even at evening meals. When a servant once brought it late, he remarked, "The empire can wait, but my appetite will not." Small details like this soften the edges of his legend. You see him now not only as emperor, but as grandfather, his grandchildren playing with wax seals and tugging at his tunic as he reads aloud from the Psalms. His health begins to decline in earnest during the final winter. Fever comes and goes. He writes fewer letters. He walks less, but he never stops watching. In his final days, he asks to be brought to the chapel. There, in the space he helped design, surrounded by stone, scripture, and the quiet hum of generations not yet born, he takes communion, whispers his last instructions, and lets go. Charlemagne dies on January 28, 814. The exact circumstances of his passing are recorded in gentle terms: fever, weakness, and stillness. His body is laid to rest in the Palatine Chapel, in a tomb of stone beneath the very dome he once walked beneath as a younger, stronger man. And here another debate lingers: was he buried upright, seated on a throne as legend suggests, or laid to rest in the earth in the fashion of other kings? Reports conflict. Bones unearthed centuries later complicate the matter further. Some believe the image of him seated in death, robed and crowned, was symbolic a myth to match the man. But regardless of position, the resting place remains beneath Aachen, beneath marble and mosaic, beneath centuries of memory. The empire will pass on. Louis the Pious will inherit both crown and burden, and the Carolingian legacy will ripple through centuries of European history through emperors, kings, parliaments, and poems. But tonight, you remain here, in the silence of a stone chapel warmed by candlelight, in the breath between one life and the next, in the quiet aftermath of a reign that began with a forest campfire and ended beneath a painted dome. The bells toll slowly outside, the snow falls, almost soundless, and you sleep beside the memory of the man they called the father of Europe. You awaken not to trumpets or footsteps, but to the quiet echo of memory, folded gently into the walls of a stone chapel. The empire of Charlemagne is no longer ruled by his voice, but it is not yet silent. Aachen still breathes with his rhythm, the bells still ring in the pattern he set, and the chapel, his final resting place, still catches the morning light on its mosaics just as he once envisioned. It is the early days of 8th Decitus and the world is already shifting. Louis the Pious has taken up the imperial mantle and with it the burden of stewardship. His coronation had already occurred, but now the title is no longer shared. It rests solely on his shoulders. The courtiers speak with hushed voices, the scribes ink their letters with solemn precision, and the empire leans, however gently, into the unknown. You walk the halls of Aachen one last time. The laughter of Charlemagne's daughters still echoes faintly in the music room, now quiet. The library, once bustling with the copying of ancient texts, now holds only the rustle of turned pages and the scent of old ink. The courtyard fig tree, planted during a campaign long ago, has shed its leaves. Beneath it, the palace dog lies curled, watching the passers-by with calm, clouded eyes. And yet, despite the hush, something remarkable persists. The structures hold, the schools continue, the scribes still write, the monasteries still ring their bells on time, the capitularies, laws, and instructions laid out by Charlemagne are still being followed. The world he built did not vanish with him. It settles in place. In churches from Saxony to Lombardy, priests offer Mass in Latin, from manuscripts written in Carolingian minuscule. Children still learn their letters in cathedral schools founded under his reign. Coins bearing his image remain in circulation. Missi Dominici continue to ride, delivering news and royal instruction. And in Rome, even the papal scribes pause to acknowledge the absence of the man who once knelt beneath St. Peter's dome and emerged with a crown that changed everything. You pass through the imperial chapel once more and stop beneath the mosaic of Christ enthroned, the image Charlemagne chose to preside over his resting place. His tomb, now sealed in quiet dignity, sits beneath the dome. No marble statue, no grand inscription, just a space filled with soft candlelight and centuries of prayer. A monk kneels nearby, chanting softly. You cannot make out the words, but you feel them, a gentle request for peace, for guidance, for memory. And so the rain ends not in fire, nor in thunder, but in echo, in pattern, in the soft continuity of a world touched by one man's long shadow. Historians would debate his legacy for centuries to come. Was he a Holy Roman Emperor, or a Frankish warlord in fine robes? Was his empire a revival of Rome, or something entirely new? Did he unite Europe, or merely hold it together by force? But tonight, none of those questions matter. Tonight, you lie in the heart of what he left behind. Not a legend, not a monument, but a rhythm, a structure, a breath that moves quietly through stone and song. You gaze up at the chapel's vaulted ceiling, the golden stars gleaming dimly in the candlelight, and you think of the paths you've walked through wars and scrolls, through gardens and council halls, across snowy borders and olive-groved valleys. From the moment of his first quiet coronation beneath a simple church roof to the final breath he took beside the altar, you have been beside him, and now, as the bells of Aachen toll once more, you drift into the last chapter with him together. And now, dear listener, you rest beneath the slow twilight of a story well told. You have wandered through forests and palaces, through cold mountain passes and warm candlelit courts. You've seen a boy rise into a king rise into an emperor, and an emperor kneel in quiet humility before the weight of time. You've heard the laughter of daughters, the scratch of quills, the clink of coins, and the echo of distant horns in snowy passes. You followed the paths of diplomacy and devotion, of law and learning. You've listened as the empire grew, not only in size, but in soul. And as Charlemagne's footsteps faded into the quiet corridors of history, you found that his presence didn't vanish. It softened. It stayed. So now, in this final hush, let your breath fall gently. Let the noise of the day slip away. Let the weight of centuries grow light on your chest. There is nothing to do, nowhere to be, just you and the quiet company of 1,000 years. Let the stars above Aachen's chapel gleam in your imagination. Let the flickering of a scribe's candle guide you through sleep. Let the slow turning of history lull you like a cradle. You have made it to the end, my dear traveller. The journey has been long, but the road was soft and the nights kind. And now, sleep. Your home